This piece is near and dear to my heart. It's the semi-permanent 2015 titles created by Raoul Marx, who is to this day one of my very favorite 3D motion artists. The atmosphere in this is just incredible, and it definitely helped launch the trend of using astronauts in everything. He also makes great use of Octane's super fast, high resolution texture displacement for all of these cratered surfaces, and in general the story and atmosphere is just on point. And though Raoul Marx is a powerhouse by himself, he's even better with creative director Patrick Clare, and at the time both of them were at the studio Elastic, which is a company known for its amazing title sequences. In this one, which is for Man in the High Castle, Raoul used Octane to create projectors and light rays to project Nazi imagery over American landmarks, which is such an impactful idea, and later on I'll show you how to do this projector setup with light rays. This is another extremely iconic one that I'm sure many of you know. Again, Raoul Marx and Patrick Clare for the Westworld titles, done at Elastic. The lighting on this is just gorgeous, and I can't get over the character animation on these hands playing the piano. These are the titles for American Gods, again, Elastic with Raoul and Patrick. Very unique, colorful lighting on this. And then here are the main titles for The Crown. Love this liquid gold stuff. Again, the same main players at Elastic. And here's the main title for Carnival Row, and this is actually after Raoul and Patrick left Elastic to do their own thing, but Elastic has continued the tradition of using Octane as their render engine of choice, and they're still doing some extremely beautiful work here. And you guessed it, more Elastic. This show is his Dark Materials, and it's one of my favorites right now. This part where all the worlds squish together and combine and then turn into the threads connecting universes is one of my favorites, and I have no idea how they pulled it off. Okay, this is the last Elastic one, I swear, but my buddy Gruyun Kim worked on this, as well as another amazing artist, Min Shi, so definitely check those two out. And this is the title sequence for Doom Patrol. The texture detail in this one is just insane. Okay, so moving on, most of you I'm sure are familiar with Beeple, who does probably 90% of his work in Octane. He's obviously a huge inspiration to the community and a good friend of mine. This is Ash Thorpe working with Xiaolin Zhang for his Awaken Akira project. There's some great use of volumetrics and very dramatic comic book type lighting here. And this is Xiaolin Zhang by himself for the PozFest 2017 titles. And the amount of detail here in these wet alleys is insane. And another one from Xiaolin Zhang for the Off Milano 2018 titles. This definitely shows just how nice Octane fog can look and how it can build a ton of moody atmosphere in your scenes. This is from my buddy Aaron Kovret, creating this super realistic bus ride in Octane. I love that this scene has such an insane draw distance that goes all the way back to these mountains. And he modeled this utility pole from scratch and just textured the crap out of it in Substance Painter. This one's called Driveler by Tai-Hoon Park, and I absolutely love all these crazy sci-fi wires here, and then this sequence with the sweeping god rays coming in through the window is just so cool. Okay, these are the Godless titles by Imaginary Forces, and another one of my favorite artists and buddies, Sakani Solomon, worked on this, and I love the high-key burned-out lighting, and creating dramatic lighting like this is definitely one of Octane's strong suits. This is my friend Gruyun Kim's work, who I mentioned before on Doom Patrol, and I love these creepy flickering lights and all these things covered in plastic, which I imagine he did in Marvelous Designer. And here's a title sequence Gruyun just released as a passion project and part of a bigger collaboration, and the colors in this are just awesome to me. The green and then this secondary orange is such a rad color scheme. And yeah, my name's in here because later this year I'm going to pitch in a minute-long animation to the overall project, which is going to have a ton of artists contributing, so it's a really cool collaborative effort. Okay, and here's another one of my favorite shows, Jack Ryan. This title sequence is done by Imaginary Forces, and they use Octane a whole lot. I love all the clever juxtapositions here and split frames. Another one of my favorite artists here, Sava Zivkovic, did these IFCC 2017 titles in Octane and 3ds Max. This is still one of my favorite ways I've seen to convey travel through space and time. Okay, and here we've got the master of detail, Cornelius Domrich, who builds pretty much everything from scratch and takes 2 to 4 months per image. He definitely pushes the limits of Octane, and these are some of my favorite renders I've ever seen. They're super iconic, and they're even used in Octane's splash page. This one's called 52 Hertz, and this one's 2088 AD, and he released an awesome breakdown and scene file for this, which is now only $1 on Gumroad, so definitely go pick that up. Here's some more beautiful sci-fi work. This one's by Friendly Robot, and the title sequence is called No Signal. I love this match cut between this old 16-track tape recorder and this twisty world machine landscape. Okay, and here's another absolute MoGraph monster, Somai Sun. His team does these amazing spots for the OnePlus phones. This one's called OnePlus 5. And this one's OnePlus 5T. And this robot running is just insane. They drew reference for the animation from anime. Here's another by Somai's team with just epic camera moves and transitions, and this one's called Oppo Reno. And here's a very different and equally awesome style by my buddies Thanos and Tony at Yeti Pictures called The Mad Sheens. This shows just how much you can pack into a scene with crowd animations, fluid sims, animated VDBs, and plants, just the works. This food spot called Pita Takia, also by Thanos and Tony of Yeti Pictures, really shows just how photorealistic your 3D can look with Octane if you know what you're doing. Beautiful lighting too on this one. And this is more of a fun and quirky abstract passion project Thanos and Tony did called Fruitless. I'm sure you've seen this one. My buddy Justin Leduc made these, and they went insanely viral, especially the Grim Reaper one. He took roughly a month to do the Reaper, and it definitely shows in the attention to detail. Okay, and this is from my good friend Mark Thorson, who I worked with a bunch in San Diego, and his composition and mood here with beautiful digital nature work, plus his ZBrush to cinema workflow with pose morphs and X particles for this character, it's all crazy good. I love how he animates the wind up on these forester trees to react to this burst, along with these turbulence FD sims. And here he's using an awesome trick of just keyframing some VDBs across to make it look like the clouds are actually simulating. And here's a couple clips from yet another super talented buddy of mine, Vic, who goes by Weight of Thought. And he spent a ton of time building this character from scratch. I love the lighting and textures in this. And who could forget Andrew Kramer with his awesome THX spot here. I worked on this one very briefly, but my buddy Aaron Westwood did all the gorgeous nature work on this section of the spot in Octane. He's seriously the best at natural environments. And this is crazy too. One of my best friends, Ryan Talbot, won Australia's Got Talent by creating the background visuals for this pole dancer, Christy Sellers. And he put together 3 epic animated stories that went along with her performance, all using Octane. And here's yet another online friend of mine, Gavin Shapiro. This dude is just a genius at creating these complex loops and super endearing penguin and flamingo-based animations. And then last but not least, my bros Ren and Clint and Sam and Nico over at Corridor Digital with their hilarious self-driving cars video here and this amazing Bosstown Dynamics video parodying Boston Dynamics. These guys are also exclusive Octane users. And also, since I'm going to be the one teaching you, here's some of my work if you're not familiar. All of it is pure Octane goodness. Cool, so first thing, let's just look at the different versions of Octane that are available. So if we go to shop here, so all these different options can get kind of confusing. So let's come down here to try. Now under Prime, free tier, we've got Blender, Daz 3D, Unity, and Unreal Engine. These are all free programs, and so Octane Render for these programs is also free. So if you're a Blender user, you're in luck because you can do full 3D scenes here and renders all with the free plugin. Now there's also a demo option if you're not sure if you want to purchase the plugin yet. The downsides are that the resolution is limited to 1000 by 600 pixels, and the live DB material database doesn't work. I'll show you what that is later. There's no network rendering, so you can't tie your computers together, and also there's going to be a watermark. Now, the cheapest option that most of you will probably want to start out with is under Rent here, and instead of this annual subscription enterprise, we can go over to Studio, and this is only 1660 euros per month, which works out to $18.17 a month, though this option is billed yearly, and if you're just wanting to try it at first, you should probably go with the monthly version, so 20 euros is close to $22 a month. Now, the major limitation on this version is that you can't go beyond 2 GPUs, but most of you probably don't have more than 2 GPUs right now anyway, so probably not a big deal. One other thing to note is that network rendering doesn't work on this version. Network rendering is where you tie multiple computers together with multiple copies of Octane, or if you have a slave node, then you can use one computer as the primary computer and the others as the nodes. Also, for this version and a bunch of others, you have to be online when using Octane, which can be irritating if you've got Comcast like me and your internet goes down all the time. So the current solution to that is get an offline USB dongle, which is kind of old school, but in this case it's not supported, so you'll have to get the enterprise version if you want to work offline. Okay, so also under the Rent tab, if we come to Enterprise here, you'll see that this bumps up to 25 euros a month, which is roughly $27, but again, that's billed yearly. So that works out to $327.36 a year, which is honestly not that bad. It's actually much cheaper than Redshift, which is about $500 a year. If you go for the actual monthly subscription, which is billed monthly, then it'll be €29.99 euros a month, which works out to $32.84 a month. So right up there with an Adobe subscription. Now with either of these versions, you get access to the whole host of DCC plugins, meaning you can install Octane for 3ds Max. There's even a version for After Effects, which I've actually never even tried. Cinema 4D, Houdini, whichever ones you want. So that's great if you've got multiple programs that you hop around between and you want to use Octane in several different contexts. Though personally, I only ever render in Octane in Cinema 4D. Now, Enterprise supports as many GPUs in your system as you want, and it also supports Octane Render network rendering and slave nodes. So again, this is for tying multiple computers together, and if you want to purchase just a slave node rather than a full version, it's much cheaper. For instance, you could have 4 GPUs in your main system and use Enterprise with Octane inside of Cinema 4D, and then when you're ready to render your animation, say you have another box with 4 GPUs sitting on the side, you could just use a slave node for that, and then when you go to fire off your final render, you're using all 8 GPUs at the same time through network rendering. And so in this case, you're saving money because you're not buying 2 full versions of Enterprise. Both Enterprise and Studio also support the new NVIDIA RTX GPUs, and we'll get into that later, and I'll show you how they can benefit your scenes and how they can speed things up anywhere from 1.5 to 5 times faster depending on your scene. And finally, if you come down here to buy, this is also the Enterprise license, and it's identical to if you were to hit rent up here, except that here you actually own the software. And so that's why it's more expensive. So as you can see, you get a perpetual license to Octane Render, except the support only lasts for either 12 months or 24 months. So this wouldn't include upgrades to 2021 release and future versions when they come out if your maintenance expires. This also comes with an Orc subscription, which is the Octane Render Cloud. That's Octane's version of a render farm. We'll get more into that later, but it's going to be replaced shortly with something called Render, that's spelled RNDR, which is a new technology invented by Otoy that's more of a distributed rendering network where anyone can have their computer online and use it to get render tokens, which is a blockchain technology, and essentially store up these render tokens to then be able to use them on jobs later. So if a client came to you and wanted you to render something really fast, if you have a bunch of render tokens, you can use it like a render farm. You could also build up these tokens if you have several powerful machines and then sell them later and change them in for actual money. It's just like Bitcoin or any other kind of cryptocurrency, and right now it's running off of the Ethereum network. Coming back to Orc though, this is another difference between renting and buying. It doesn't look like you have access to Orc under the rental model. And for all these versions, including the cheap Studio subscription, you also have access to LiveDB. Now, if you look here under product specifications, you'll see requires a CUDA 10 capable NVIDIA graphics card. So this is going to be true with Redshift and Octane and even Arnold GPU. You need an NVIDIA graphics card. So that's why a lot of people have switched over to PC, because Mac is not really supporting NVIDIA graphics cards much anymore. Now, if you do have a Mac, then don't despair, because in less than 6 months, Octane X is coming out for macOS. And they actually had to rebuild Octane X from the ground up using Metal, which is a programming language for Mac like OpenGL or OpenCL. And it's been a bunch of years in the making, but it's finally on the way. Now, personally, I still prefer PC because you can get way more bang for your buck. I used to be an Apple fanboy, but as I got into 3D, I realized that the biggest bottleneck as far as productivity goes is always going to be rendering. It's always the slowest part of the process. So I just started stockpiling these GPUs and creating my own render farm at home, basically. And to do that with a Mac, first off, wouldn't even be possible right now because of that limitation with NVIDIA cards. But even if I could, it would end up just being so much more expensive. Speaking of GPUs, though, you might be lost as to which ones to buy. So my recommendation for the best cards out there right now for GPU rendering are the 1080 Ti and the 2080 Ti. 1080 Ti's are great right now if you're trying to save a bit of money, and you should be able to get them for about $400 or $500 used, or about $800 new, though those prices do fluctuate. Whereas the 2080 Ti's are about 1.5 times faster than the 1080 Ti's, and with the new RTX benefits that I was discussing a minute ago, they can improve your speed up to 5 times faster than that even, depending on your scene. And the reason for that is because they have these breakthrough RTX cores that were developed for real-time ray tracing in games. And Octane and Redshift have just started to leverage this technology. So if you really want to future-proof, then go for the 2080 Ti's. The downside, though, is that these go for about $1,200 per card. Now, if you're curious for how well a graphics card performs and you want to test it out, go here to Octane Bench, and this will actually let you download and test your own GPUs in your computer. The other thing you can do is go up here to view results, and you can see the average for other people's scores when they tested on their own rigs. For instance, say I type in 4x RTX 2080 Ti, and actually you need a space here because it's a bit finicky. So if you scroll down here, you can see other people's results. 148 have reported, and the average is 1172. So that's a really good score. If we change this to GTX 1080 Ti, and we scroll down here, the average is 852. If you have one GTX 1080 Ti, scroll all the way down, your score is going to be about 216. And interestingly, let's say we type in 4x Titan. So the Titan line of cards is actually one step above the Ti line of cards. But if you look here, 4x Titan V is only 1236. That's not that much better than what we saw with 4 2080 Ti's. And 4 Titan RTX is actually even less, weirdly. So these cards are not necessarily faster than the 2080 Ti's, or at least not by much. And if you look, they're double the price. Now, the one nice thing about Titans is that they have 24 gigabytes of memory, and that's a big deal because the more VRAM your card has, the bigger the scene you can create. 2080 Ti's and 1080 Ti's both have 11 gigabytes of memory, which in most cases is more than enough, though I have reached that limit a bunch of times. Another great option is the 2070, and you'll get results pretty similar to the 1080 Ti, but you'll also have the RTX benefits, so this is another good one to consider. And overall, they're pretty cheap, but very powerful. But keep in mind the limitation of 8 gigabytes of VRAM versus 11 gigabytes of VRAM for a 1080 Ti might be an issue with limiting your scene size. Last thing I want to mention real quick, if you're building a system with multiple graphics cards, you want to avoid models like this with multiple fans, because when you stack them really closely together, the fans can actually physically grind on one another and create a really bad heat situation in your case. If you type in 2080 Ti blower into Newegg or Amazon, you'll see models more like this with a single fan here, and they bring the air into this intake here and spit it out the back of the card. So that's a much better cooling situation for your case if you have multiple cards stacked. Here's another example. There's a bunch of different brands you can get, but they're all effectively the same as long as they say RTX 2080 Ti. This might be a lot to take in because we haven't even touched the software yet, but I'm trying to prepare you for the reality of doing animation in 3D. If you're just doing stills or style frames, that's one thing. If you're doing cartoony looks like my buddy EJ Hassenfratz, that's another thing entirely. But if you're trying to make more photorealistic looking 3D and you're trying to do animation, then you'll need to start getting into these multiple card scenarios. That's not to say you have to build it yourself. There are plenty of sites out there like AVA Direct or Puget Systems or Origin PC that will build you awesome custom builds, and they'll just arrive at your door already working. Personally, I just think it's extremely useful to know how to build a PC, because when something goes wrong, you can rip open your computer and troubleshoot things and get it working, rather than having to send a whole system back into the manufacturer, leaving you out of a job for several days or even weeks. To me, that's a nightmare scenario. I'm not saying this to brag, but my personal render farm is up to 8 1080 Ti's, 4 2080 Ti's, and 2 980 Ti's spread across 4 systems, and even still, it's not enough for many animation projects, especially when clients are often expecting 4K resolution or higher. I've been doing a lot of concert visuals lately, and those are often 4.5K renders for 1500 or more frames per shot, and scenes like that can easily render for a week or more on one of my machines before they're done. That's also why it can help to have multiple machines, because when one of your rigs is locked up and rendering, you can switch to another one and keep working. Obviously, when you're first starting out, you're not going to have that kind of setup, but it's definitely useful to gradually reinvest in yourself as a business and continue to build up your farm. Cool, so last thing before I show you how to actually install the software and use it, this is the Octane Render Facebook group, and it's home to 35,000 members that constantly share really inspirational and awesome work, as well as tutorials, quick tips, and news about the software. And this is my site, ariavisuals.com, and after you finish taking this course, I definitely recommend you go here to tutorials and check out my other tutorials if you want to really expand your Octane knowledge. And last but not least, if you go to my resources page, this is my David Ariev Super Mega Octane tutorial list, and here I obsessively list every Octane tutorial that I have ever seen. When I first started out with Octane around 2013, it was kind of the Wild West, and it was a lot more difficult to learn the software, so I started obsessively collecting a list of any tutorials that I found, and then eventually I shared that online. So if you scroll down, I've got descriptions on tons of people that have released Octane tutorials, and the vast majority of these are free. And there are even some additional resources down here at the bottom. So if you really want to gain a deep understanding of Octane, I would definitely go through this list. Okay, so let's take a look at how to actually install Octane. First, let's jump into our account page, and then come over here to downloads. And you'll notice here that the default is Octane Render Standalone. It might be Studio Standalone depending on what you bought. But just to quickly explain, Standalone is kind of the backbone of Octane. As the name suggests, it's a standalone program that is very different from the interface you would get in Cinema 4D, but can do all of the same things. And often the newest updates and cool cutting edge features come to Standalone before they make it to the plugins. Now you don't actually have to download standalone, you can just download the C4D plugin, but Otoy recommends having it installed as well, and there are a few extra capabilities that it has, so let's just download that first. So I'm going to go here to download the newest version of 2019 1.5, hit accept, and download. Now I'm going to go back to my downloads here, and I'm just going to switch this down to Octane Render Enterprise for Cinema 4D, or again, maybe you have a studio version, but for me it's going to be Enterprise, and I'm going to choose Windows, and then I'll grab this latest version, 2019 1.5 R2, so I'll just download that, come down, accept, download. Okay, while that downloads, I'll install Octane Standalone. And that's done. And then here, let's show this in folder. And here I'll just right click. I've got 7-zip for this. So extract. And that's now extracted as this C4D Octane folder. I'm going to jump into this real quick. Now you can see there are a bunch of different versions. I'm running R20. And as a force of habit, I'm going to delete everything but R20. And the plugin used to get mad at you and give you a bunch of error messages if you didn't do this, but I don't think that's the case anymore. So you can just ignore that if you want. And now to install this, I'm just going to cut this and jump over to my C drive, program files, Maxon, R20, plugins, and then I'm going to paste. All right, so everything should be good to go. I'm going to launch standalone first just to show you what it is. So I'm going to come down here and type in Octane. And then here I've got Octane Render 2019 1.5. If you're wondering, that exists in your program files here, C drive, and come down here to Otoy, and there we go. I've also got a slave license on here. So here's standalone. So just for funsies, I've exported one of my C4D scenes into standalone, and here's the overwhelming, intimidating mess that is my scene. Though I can click on this render target here and it'll start to render. So just FYI, I barely know how to use standalone at all, and it was a struggle just now for me to even be able to get this thing to show full screen without cropping. There are a bunch of concept artists that are weird geniuses and love using standalone, but that's definitely the exception, and this is probably one of the last times I'll open up standalone in this course. Bye, standalone. Okay, and last little tip I wanted to give you all real quick is if you want the absolute latest version, rather than going to downloads, come up here to forum, and then drop down to Maxon Cinema 4D. And here you can post bug reports or requests or just general issues and discussion about the software. But I'm going to go up here to releases. And you can see here, this is the latest stable version. So this is 2019 1.5 R3, which is one version higher than R2 that we just downloaded. Now I would use either 2019 1.5 R2 or R3 if you're on a job and you really need stability. But if you want to test the latest features that include RTX benefits, you'd go up here to this 2020 XB3 R2 experimental release. And you can see the developer Amit Akhtar has given a breakdown on all the changes in this version, as well as what to do in case of crashes and some other information. Then you just come down here to any of these links, depending on if you've got a Windows Enterprise build or a Subscription Studio build, or if you're on Mac OS. One other thing to keep in mind with any of these releases is that you'll need to update your Cinema 4D to the latest version. To do that, just come into Cinema 4D here, and then come up to Help and check for updates. So if your version of Octane isn't working here, then this could be why. I don't have any updates, but maybe you do.